step. You can't be sitting here. Get moving.
I'm just checking my email before I head in.
This isn't a public bench. You're loitering and making folks nervous.
Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm assigned to this building.
Don't care if you run the Pentagon. You're done here.
Then congratulations, you just profiled a federal agent on camera.
Officer Kyle Mitchell had 18 months on the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, but he'd already accumulated 4 complaints in that short time. Each one followed the same pattern. Black men in professional settings who Mitchell decided didn't belong. One frigid January morning outside a government building in Washington, D.C., that pattern would cost the city $4,200,000 and destroy Mitchell's law enforcement career before it truly began. The man sitting on the bench was Intelligence Officer James Turner, an 11-year veteran with the Defense Intelligence Agency. He worked in the building directly behind him. He had top-secret clearance. He'd briefed Joint Chiefs of Staff on threat assessments. He was simply checking his phone before his morning briefing. But Officer Mitchell saw a black man on a bench outside a government facility and made an assumption that would become the most expensive mistake of his young career. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Washington, D.C., the nation's capital where government buildings stand like fortresses and security is woven into the fabric of daily life. It was 7:15 on a Tuesday morning in January. The temperature hovered just above freezing. The sun was barely up. The kind of morning where your breath forms clouds and walking from your car to your building feels like crossing the Arctic. Intelligence Officer James Turner had been with the Defense Intelligence Agency for 11 years. 11 years providing critical military intelligence to combatant commanders. He'd served tours in Afghanistan and Iraq as a defense attaché. He'd coordinated intelligence operations with NATO allies. He'd been part of the team that tracked weapons proliferation networks across Eastern Europe. His work had directly contributed to operations that saved American lives. His supervisors rated him as exceptional. His security clearances were renewed without question every 5 years. His dedication to the mission was absolute. That morning, he arrived at work 20 minutes early. He always did. Turner believed in being prepared and having time to review his notes before meetings and starting the day ahead of schedule. He'd parked in his assigned space in the secured lot, he'd grabbed his briefcase and his coffee, and then he'd sat down on the bench outside the building entrance to check his email on his phone before heading through security. It was something he did maybe twice a week. The bench was public, the sidewalk was public, he wasn't blocking anything, he wasn't bothering anyone. He was just a government employee taking 5 minutes before work to handle personal messages he couldn't access on his classified work computer. Turner was 42 years old. He'd grown up in Philadelphia, the son of a postal worker and a teacher. He'd served 6 years in the Air Force before joining DIA. He had a master's degree in international relations. He spoke Arabic and Farsi. He'd testified in classified briefings. He'd received commendations for analytical excellence. His career was distinguished by steady, reliable service to national security. He wore a charcoal suit that morning, a blue tie, black dress shoes polished to military standards. His DIA badge was clipped to his belt under his suit jacket. His briefcase sat beside him on the bench. Everything about his appearance said professional government employee. Everything except the color of his skin. And for Officer Kyle Mitchell, that was all that mattered. Officer Kyle Mitchell had been with Washington Metropolitan Police for 18 months. He'd graduated from the academy with average scores. Nothing exceptional, nothing concerning, just adequate enough to pass. His field training had been unremarkable. His first few months on patrol had been quiet. But then the complaints started. The first came 4 months into his solo patrol. Mitchell had stopped a black attorney outside a law firm in Georgetown, demanded ID, questioned why he was there. The attorney had been going to work at his own firm. The complaint was filed. Internal Affairs reviewed it. Mitchell claimed he'd seen suspicious behavior. The case was closed with a verbal warning. The second complaint came 3 months later. Mitchell stopped a black professor walking across the campus of George Washington University, accused him of trespassing. The professor taught there. He had faculty ID. Mitchell insisted he still looked suspicious. Another complaint, another IA review, another warning. The third complaint involved a black businessman sitting in his Mercedes outside a restaurant in Logan Circle. Mitchell approached with his hand on his weapon, demanded to know whose car it was. The man owned it. He was waiting for his wife. Mitchell claimed the vehicle matched the stolen car report. It didn't. Another complaint, another warning. The fourth complaint was filed by a black jogger in Rock Creek Park. Mitchell had stopped him, searched his backpack without consent, and accused him of drug possession. The backpack contained water bottles and energy bars, no drugs, no contraband, just a man exercising. The complaint was substantiated. Mitchell received a written reprimand and mandatory bias training, but he stayed on patrol. His supervisors noted concerns about pattern recognition, but didn't remove him from the street. They required him to attend workshops, to complete online modules, to watch videos about implicit bias and constitutional policing. Mitchell attended. He completed the requirements, he signed the forms, and then he went right back to seeing black men as threats in spaces where white people move freely without question. That Tuesday morning, Mitchell was on routine patrol near the government complex. His shift had started at 6. He'd been driving slowly through the area, watching people arrive for work. Security was always tight near government buildings, always vigilant. But there was a difference between vigilance and profiling. Mitchell had never learned where that line was. He drove past the DIA Analysis Center and saw James Turner sitting on the bench, a black man, in a suit, on his phone, outside a secured government facility. Mitchell's mind didn't process analysts on his morning routine. It didn't process cleared employee taking 5 minutes before work. It processed suspicious individual conducting surveillance. Potential threat, someone who needed to be questioned. The assumption was immediate and automatic. Mitchell pulled his patrol car to the curb and got out. Do you think officers profile based on preconceived notions about who belongs in professional spaces? Drop your answer below. James Turner noticed the patrol car stopping, but didn't think much of it. Police presence near government buildings was normal, expected. He kept scrolling through his personal email. A message from his sister about Sunday dinner. A reminder about his car insurance renewal. Nothing urgent, just clearing his inbox before he went into a classified environment where personal phones weren't allowed. Then he heard footsteps approaching and looked up. "You can't be standing here," Officer Mitchell said, his tone immediately confrontational. "Keep it moving." Turner looked at him, confused. "Good morning, officer. I'm just checking my email before I head in." Mitchell stepped closer, his hand resting near his belt. "This isn't a public bench. You're loitering and making folks nervous." Turner glanced around. The sidewalk was empty except for them. Nobody else was around to be nervous. "I'm sorry, officer, but this is a public bench on a public sidewalk. I'm not loitering. I work in that building." He gestured toward the DIA facility behind him. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "You work there?" "Yes. I'm heading in shortly for a morning briefing." "What do you do?" "I'm an intelligence officer with DIA." Mitchell's expression didn't change. He didn't show recognition. He didn't show respect. He showed skepticism. "Sure you are." And there it was, the disbelief. The automatic assumption that a black man couldn't possibly work in military intelligence, that he must be lying, that his presence outside a government building must mean something criminal rather than something routine. Turner felt the familiar weight of it, the exhaustion of having to prove you belong everywhere you go, of having your credentials questioned, your truthfulness doubted, your very presence treated as suspicious. He'd dealt with this before, in airports, in hotels, in restaurants, even occasionally in professional settings, but he never expected it from a police officer outside his own workplace. Turner reached slowly for his belt. "I'm going to show you my credentials. They're clipped to my belt under my jacket." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Mitchell ordered. "They are where you can see them. I'm telling you what I'm doing before I do it. That's protocol." Turner carefully lifted his suit jacket and unclipped his DIA badge. He held it out. The gold badge gleamed even in the weak morning light. His photo, his name, his title, Intelligence Officer, Defense Intelligence Agency. All of it official, all of it legitimate. Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm assigned to this building. I have top secret clearance. I brief senior military leadership. And I'm sitting on this bench checking my email like I do twice a week before work. Mitchell barely glanced at the badge. That could be fake. Turner stared at him, disbelief mixing with anger. "Officer, this is a legitimate federal credential. You can verify it with one call. What you can't do is tell a federal intelligence officer he can't sit on a public bench outside his own workplace. Don't care if you run the Pentagon. You're done here." Turner's jaw tightened. He could feel his blood pressure rising, could feel the injustice of it settling into his bones. "Excuse me?" Mitchell stepped even closer. "I said, you're done here. Move along or I'll arrest you for loitering and obstruction." This is where bias becomes authority. Officer Mitchell wasn't operating on evidence. He had legitimate credentials in front of him. He had a professional explaining calmly where he worked and why he was there. He had no actual suspicious behavior, no complaint, no legal justification for the stop, but none of that mattered because in Mitchell's mind, James Turner couldn't be who he said he was. Black men didn't work for DIA. They didn't have top secret clearance. They didn't brief generals. They were threats. They were suspicious. They needed to be controlled. Turner made a decision. He pulled out his phone. Then, congratulations, officer. You just profiled a federal agent on camera. He started recording. Put that phone down, Mitchell ordered. No, I have the right to record a police interaction in public, and what you're doing is unconstitutional. You stopped me without reasonable suspicion. You're detaining me without cause. You're refusing to verify my credentials, and you're doing it because I'm black. Mitchell's face flushed. I'm doing my job. Your job isn't to harass federal employees outside their workplace. Your job isn't to assume every black man in a suit is committing a crime. I said, put the phone down. Turner kept recording. Officer Kyle Mitchell, badge number visible on your uniform. January 16th, 7:22 a.m. You are detaining a Defense Intelligence Agency officer outside the DIA Analysis Center without legal justification. This is being documented. A car pulled into the parking lot. A white woman in her 50s got out. She was another DIA employee. She recognized Turner immediately. James, is everything okay? Turner kept his phone raised. Officer Mitchell here doesn't believe I work for DIA. He's threatening to arrest me for sitting on a bench outside our building. The woman walked closer. Officer, I'm Dr. Patricia Reynolds. I work with James. He's a senior intelligence officer. He has every right to be here. Mitchell spun toward her. Ma'am, step back. This doesn't concern you. It absolutely concerns me. You're harassing my colleague. Another vehicle pulled up, then another. Within minutes, 3 more DIA employees had arrived for work. All of them recognized Turner. All of them stopped to see what was happening. All of them had their phones out. Mitchell was now surrounded by witnesses, federal employees, people with security clearances and connections to military leadership, people who could verify everything Turner had said. And still, he couldn't let go of his assumption. Should officers face immediate suspension for refusing to verify law enforcement credentials? Let me know what you think. One of the employees, a retired Army colonel named Robert Hayes, stepped forward. His voice carried military authority. Officer, I'm Colonel Hayes, retired. I work with Intelligence Officer Turner. Whatever you think is happening here, you're mistaken. James is one of the most respected analysts at this facility. You need to verify his credentials and end this now. Mitchell's radio crackled. Dispatch had received calls, multiple calls. Federal employees reporting an officer harassing a DIA analyst. The situation was escalating beyond Mitchell's control. A supervisor was being sent. Federal Protective Service was being notified. This was no longer just a street stop. This was a potential international incident involving military intelligence personnel. Turner stood calmly, his phone still recording, his DIA badge still visible in his other hand. Officer Mitchell, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to end this lawfully. Verify my credentials through the proper channels. Admit you made a mistake, or continue with this unlawful detention and face the consequences. Mitchell didn't move. Pride and bias locked him in place. He couldn't back down, couldn't admit error, couldn't accept that he'd profiled a federal intelligence officer in front of multiple witnesses with cameras. A second patrol car arrived. Sergeant Angela Foster stepped out. She was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for professionalism. She took one look at the scene and immediately understood what had happened. She'd reviewed Mitchell's complaint file. She'd warned her lieutenant that he was a liability, but nobody had listened. Mitchell, Foster called out sharply, stepped back from the subject. Sarge, this individual, I said, step back, now. Foster approached Turner, who was still standing with his phone and badge visible. Sir, I'm Sergeant Foster. I apologize for this situation. May I see your credentials? Turner handed them over. Foster examined them carefully. Then she looked at the building behind them, the secured entrance, the government plates in the parking lot, the other employees standing around with their badges visible. She turned to Mitchell, her voice cold and hard. You stopped a DIA intelligence officer outside his own workplace? He was acting suspicious. He was checking his phone on a bench. Foster cut him off. There's nothing suspicious about that. Nothing except your assumption that a black man couldn't possibly work here. The other DIA employees were still recording. The evidence was overwhelming. The damage was done. Intelligence Officer Turner, Foster said formally, on behalf of the Metropolitan Police Department, I apologize. This stop was without justification. You'll receive a formal apology in writing, and I'll personally ensure you have access to all body camera footage and incident reports. Turner nodded. I'll be filing a formal complaint and a federal civil rights lawsuit. That's your right. And honestly, I don't blame you. Foster turned to Mitchell. Badge, gun, radio. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. Mitchell's hands trembled as he complied. His face had gone pale. The reality was finally hitting him. He just ended his own career on camera in front of multiple federal employees. Colonel Hayes stepped forward. "Sergeant, I want to be clear. This isn't just about one bad stop." Officer Mitchell accused a senior intelligence officer of criminal activity based solely on his race. In the current security environment, that kind of profiling could have serious implications. DIA will be filing its own complaint through federal channels. Foster nodded grimly. "I understand, sir. This will be fully investigated." The scene dispersed slowly. Turner finally lowered his phone. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from rage. From the humiliation of being treated like a criminal outside his own workplace. From having to prove his right to exist in a space he'd earned through years of service and sacrifice. Dr. Reynolds touched his arm gently. "James, are you okay?" "No," he said quietly. "No, I'm really not." By 9 a.m., the story was already spreading through Washington's federal workforce. By noon, it was on social media. By evening, it was national news. DIA analyst profiled outside his own workplace. DC cop threatens to arrest intelligence officer for sitting on bench. Federal employee detained while reporting to work. Video shows officer refusing to verify credentials of black DIA analyst. The headlines wrote themselves. The outrage was immediate and widespread. Military veterans shared the story with fury. Intelligence community members expressed solidarity. Civil rights organizations demanded accountability. The Defense Intelligence Agency issued a statement before the day was over. "We are aware of this morning's incident involving one of our intelligence officers. The conduct displayed by Officer Mitchell was unacceptable and does not reflect the respect our personnel deserve. We are coordinating with DC Metropolitan Police and will ensure this matter is thoroughly investigated." The DC Mayor's office followed hours later. "We take this incident extremely seriously. No one should be profiled or harassed, especially not federal employees serving our national security. A full investigation is underway." Civil rights attorneys contacted James Turner that same day. The case was straightforward. Mitchell had no reasonable suspicion. He'd refused to verify legitimate credentials. He'd threatened an unlawful arrest. He'd done it all on camera. And he'd done it because he couldn't imagine a black man working in military intelligence. The lawsuit named Officer Kyle Mitchell, Sergeant Foster's predecessor who'd failed to act on the complaint pattern, and the DC Metropolitan Police Department. The claims were clear and compelling. Unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion, racial profiling and discrimination, violation of federal civil rights, failure to train and supervise on implicit bias, retaliation for recording a police interaction. The city's attorneys reviewed the evidence. Body camera footage from Mitchell's camera, cell phone videos from 5 different DIA employees, Turner's recording, the credibility of multiple federal employees with security clearances, Mitchell's complaint history showing a clear pattern. The conclusion came quickly. This case couldn't be defended. DC settled 11 months later. $4,200,000 paid to intelligence officer James Turner, the largest racial profiling settlement in the district's history. The money came from taxpayers, from the same public that depended on people like Turner to keep them safe from foreign threats, but had failed to keep Turner safe from domestic bias with a badge. Officer Kyle Mitchell was terminated 7 weeks after the incident. His termination letter was brief and final. Officer Mitchell engaged in racial profiling that violated department policy, federal law, and constitutional protections. His stop of intelligence officer Turner was without legal justification and motivated by racial bias. His refusal to verify legitimate federal credentials demonstrated a fundamental failure of judgment. His employment is terminated immediately with no possibility of rehire. Mitchell's name went into the National Decertification Index. No other police department would hire him. Not in DC, not in Maryland, not in Virginia, not anywhere in the country. His law enforcement career was over at age 25. He attempted to appeal through the police union. They reviewed the evidence, the videos, the witnesses, the pattern of complaints. They declined to represent him. One union representative was quoted anonymously saying, "We can't defend the indefensible. He profiled a DIA analyst outside his own workplace on camera. There's nothing to appeal." Mitchell released a statement through an attorney. "I made serious errors in judgment during my encounter with Intelligence Officer Turner. I failed to properly verify his credentials and allowed my assumptions to override my training. I take responsibility and apologize to Mr. Turner and the DIA community." The apology changed nothing. The damage was permanent. Why do officers assume black professionals are lying about their credentials? Comment your thoughts. The DC Metropolitan Police Department faced intense scrutiny. How had Mitchell, with 4 prior complaints of racial profiling, remained on patrol? Why had each complaint been closed with warnings instead of real consequences? What training existed to prevent officers from profiling federal employees? Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive review. What they found was systemic failure across multiple levels, complaints minimized to avoid paperwork, training completed but not internalized, supervisors pressured to close cases quickly, a culture that protected officers at the expense of accountability, no mechanism for tracking patterns until they resulted in lawsuits. The Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice investigation specifically focused on racial profiling. Federal oversight was imposed, reforms were mandated and monitored. Immediate supervisor review of any stop involving federal employees or law enforcement. Mandatory intervention after 2 substantiated complaints of bias. Real-time demographic analysis of all stops. Quarterly reporting to federal monitors. Community Oversight Board with subpoena power and independent investigative authority. Intelligence Officer James Turner became an unexpected voice for reform. He testified before the D.C. City Council. He spoke at forums attended by federal employees across agencies. He gave interviews to national media. His message was consistent and powerful. I serve this country. I have top secret clearance. I briefed generals and admirals on threats to national security. But Officer Mitchell saw me as a threat because I'm black. Think about what that means. Think about the message it sends, that your credentials don't matter. Your service doesn't matter. Your rank doesn't matter. All that matters is your skin color. He paused during one particularly emotional testimony. How many other black federal employees has this happened to? How many didn't have witnesses? How many didn't have video? How many just accepted it because they thought no one would believe a cop could be that biased? The answer is too many. And until we hold officers accountable before they accumulate 4 or 5 or 6 complaints, it's going to keep happening. The council chamber was silent. Several members nodded. Some had tears in their eyes. Turner used a portion of his settlement to establish a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in intelligence and national security. He wanted the next generation to see themselves in these roles, to know they belonged, to refuse to accept that their presence in professional spaces would always be questioned. The incident stayed with him. He still worked at DIA, still served his country, still briefed senior leaders, but something had changed. He was more cautious now, more aware, more careful about where he sat, where he stood, how he moved through the world. The ease of just existing without thinking about being profiled, that was gone. He resented that Officer Mitchell had taken that from him, but he refused to let it take his career or his dignity. Should any officer with multiple substantiated bias complaints be automatically barred from patrol? Let me know in the comments. This wasn't just about one bad stop. This was about how racial profiling operates when it targets successful people of color in professional environments. Officer Mitchell didn't see an intelligence officer. He didn't see a cleared federal employee. He didn't see someone who'd earned his position through education, service, and sacrifice. He saw a black man outside a government building, and every assumption he'd ever absorbed told him that couldn't be legitimate. Black men were janitors or security guards. They weren't analysts. They didn't have clearances. They didn't brief senior leadership. They were threats to be neutralized, not professionals to be respected. Those assumptions were so embedded that evidence couldn't shake them. A federal badge didn't matter. Multiple witnesses didn't matter. The complete absence of suspicious behavior didn't matter. What mattered was that James Turner didn't fit Officer Mitchell's mental picture of who belongs in military intelligence. And rather than question his worldview, Mitchell questioned Turner's right to exist in that space. This is how racial profiling works. It doesn't announce itself. It wraps itself in the language of public safety and threat assessment. It claims to be proactive policing, but what it really is the enforcement of racial boundaries. The message that certain spaces belong to white people and anyone else must constantly justify their presence. Kyle Mitchell's career is over. That's justice. DC paid $4,200,000. That's accountability. But money and terminations don't erase the violation. They don't restore the dignity of being treated like a criminal outside your own workplace. They don't undo the moment when a decorated intelligence officer had to defend his right to sit on a bench before work. The real question is, what changes now? Do departments finally remove officers after 2 substantiated bias complaints instead of waiting until they've accumulated 6 or 7? Do they finally accept that workshops and videos aren't enough when there are no consequences for acting on bias? Do they finally acknowledge that pattern recognition isn't the same as racial profiling? Because if we don't fix the system that let Kyle Mitchell patrol for 18 months with 4 complaints, If we don't address the assumptions that taught him to see black professionals as inherently suspicious, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next victim, the next settlement that costs millions while changing nothing about the culture that created the problem. Comment if you believe officers should face automatic decertification after 2 substantiated complaints of racial profiling. No third chances, no more warnings, just removal from law enforcement permanently. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, if you think accountability matters and reform starts with visibility, then hit that subscribe button, because we're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for communities and federal employees who deserve to serve their country without being profiled for their skin color. This isn't just about one officer or one intelligence analyst. It's about all of us and the system we're willing to tolerate.